Good morning. How are you? Beautiful day we're having today, right? Beautiful day. Well, it's only going to be 117 today. So we are so glad that the air conditioner works. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for air conditioning. We give thanks for the air conditioning today. So thank you for being here. I hope you have a great day today.
Did you say 117?
I don't know. It's going to be hot.
Once
it gets above 110, it really doesn't matter, does it?
You know what I'm waiting for?
What do you? I don't even want to know what you're waiting for. Go ahead, tell us.
That 1 week in November where the temperature drops to about 85 and all the mink coats come out. That's what I'm waiting for. That's my kind of weather. Oh, let's do this service.
We have lost all control.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Please don't tell Richard we kind of gallivanted around this Sunday. Go ahead.
So let's affirm our mission statement together.
Good plan. Together?
Unity of Phoenix is a loving spiritual community that welcomes all people and honors all paths to God. We are dedicated to transforming lives by inspiring and awakening individuals to discover God's Spirit within them. And now if you will stand and join us in our opening song.
Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. I can feel the brush of angels' wings. I see glory on each face. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place.
Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. So just take a few moments and breathe into that reality. And as we enter into this time of prayer and this time of meditation, I want to encourage you to just gently let go of all of your cares and concerns. Give yourself permission to be fully present. And to experience the energy of the quietness and the meditative process. So let's begin by taking a deep, refreshing breath and getting comfortable in your seat. And slowly and gently, just begin to slow your mind down. Corral all of those racing thoughts. And just mentally set them aside. And speak the words of the Master to yourself. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. Oftentimes, as we open our hearts and minds to the presence and power of God, we occasionally run into ourselves and we get in the way of our own spiritual growth and understanding. So as we take a few moments in the silence, we are reminded of who we are and what we are. And if that revelation has any meaning whatsoever for you, may you be ever so grateful. We give thanks for all the blessings in our lives, the blessings of family and friends, the blessings of laughter and love, the blessings of joyfulness, and the blessings of the Spirit. All of these incredible gifts that we've each been blessed with. We give thanks. And so it is. Amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And leave us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Thank you. All right, how many of you have already had a miracle since we began our series on miracles? All right, have you emailed me your miracles to share them? Because I want to hear them. I want to hear your miracles. I want to hear the way that God is working in your life. Because who doesn't want to hear how God's working in somebody's life? I want to hear it. It's so inspiring. You know, one of the things that we've been doing this summer is not only we've been doing miracles on Sunday morning, and on Wednesday I've been doing the series on being a go-giver and really expanding our ability to give, our desire to give, and the power that our gifts have in the world. And I came across this incredible story out of New Jersey this week. I don't know if you saw it on the news. So here's this 24-year-old waitress, 2 firemen working all night long putting out this warehouse fire. They come in for the strongest cup of coffee she could make for them. They decided to order breakfast. They have breakfast. She's so touched by them working all night as a firefighter that she actually, out of her own money, pays for their breakfast. And then they're so touched by her generosity that they go home and they're going to put it on Facebook what an incredible person she is. And then they see on Facebook that she's got this GoFundMe account and that she wants to raise $17,000. At the time, she had $6,000 when they saw it. And so they begin to share it. It gets on the news. And as of the end of last week, it was at $57,000. She needed $17,000 to get her dad a van that he could be in his wheelchair. And so not only did they have enough money for that, but they had $40,000 left over. And that's just where it is right now. So what's the lesson in this? That as you give, right? as you honor the voice of God that says to you, go and do a nice thing for somebody, as you are willing to trust that activity of spirit that's at work in you, things happen, miracles are created. I mean, was this the perfect story between giving greater and greater ways and experiencing a miracle? She got her miracle. She was at about $6,000 before the fireman got it, and then by the end of the week, she was at $57,000. How cool is that? Right? So the question then becomes, what is God calling you to do? What's the thing that God is calling you to do to move your life forward? And would you be willing to step into a greater experience of life? You know, we've been looking at principles, ideas that help us create miracles. Let's shoot those up on the screen. In our Summer of Miracles, there's been several key ideas that I've wanted to share with you. The first one is just opening your mind to the possibility of miracles and really allow the possibilities for greater and greater good in your life, to really allow the goodness that God has for you to be downloaded into your life. And so we began with the idea, I am ready for a miracle, to really begin to entertain the idea that I am ready for a miracle. Then the next week we focused on opening a space for greater love, that all miracles are an expression of how much we're loved by God. So that as we move into a greater experience of God, as we open our hearts more, the miracles begin to flow into our life. So the second week we focused really on expanding our capacity to not only love, but to be loved, and to allow the infinite to love us in greater and greater ways. Then in the third week, we focused on the idea of how to make a declaration, how to ask, and how to declare the spiritual truth. Because as we learn to ask in greater and greater ways, the universe says yes over and over and over again. So in the third week, we worked on this idea that we can ask and declare. And then we worked on believing. And we talked about how the power of believing allows us to feel good. And last week, we worked on transformation. And there were four key aspects of transformation that I wanted to share with you last week. The first one was to see it, to see what's going on in your life without judgment or resistance. The next one was to acknowledge that God is right there, that God is at work in every level of that situation. And the third was to call it into a higher being, higher level of good. And the fourth was to give thanks. Right? Did everybody get an opportunity to practice that this week? I did. So Monday afternoon, having lunch with my wife, and I'm going to tell you a story, and she's fine. Right? I don't want you to panic. She's fine, okay? So I'm having lunch with my wife on Monday morning, and she says, I'm not feeling good. I'm feeling a little funny on the inside. And at one point, she grabbed the table at both sides, and she said, something's not right. And so I went home, we had the dog with us, we dropped the dog off, and she sat down, and she said, my legs are heavy, my arm is heavy. And I was like, uh-oh. So we had like a 2-minute conversation where they're going to call the EMTs, or was I going to take her to the local hospital? And we decided we were going to shoot for St. Joe's because that's where her doctor was, and she's been on medication, and one of the side effects of the medication is it can bring on stroke-like symptoms. And so we drove down to St. Joe's. And the most amazing thing that happens when you get into an emergency room and you say that you're there to rule out a stroke is they really move. You know, sometimes if you've ever been to an emergency room and you can kind of sit there for a long, long time, but if you use the stroke word, because you only have 3 hours. You know, there's a medication, and you have 3 hours by the time you show up, or before the onset starts, you have 3 hours to get the medicine in you, and before the stroke is permanent, right? And so when you use the stroke word, the doors open. It's like heaven just comes in. And there were 6 nurses working on her, and there were 2 doctors, 1 ER doctor, 1 neurologist, and everybody is in high motion. And then she's gone, and they're doing a CT scan and an MRI, and they're trying to discern if she's had a stroke because she's got paralysis now down the left side of her body. And And so the doctor wants to give her the shot. I'm not so sure about the shot yet because we haven't got the results yet from the test, and this medicine she's on can create stroke-like symptoms. And so I'm saying, let's wait. And so we're kind of doing this little dance, but she only got 3 hours. The clock's on. I'm freaking out, trying not to look like I'm freaking out. Have you ever been in that place where you're freaking out on the inside, but you can't really let it because you got too much responsibility? So you're trying to not freak out on the outside, but you're freaking out on the inside. So everybody's swarming. Everything's going. She's in and out. And at one point, she just begins to laugh. Now, my wife laughs a lot. She's probably the happiest person I've ever met. But the idea of laughing in an emergency room, in the bed, I think, oh, we've lost her now. She's gone over to the other side, right? She's gone insane, and all I can do is hope to pick up the pieces, right? So she starts laughing, and I'm like, okay, what's funny? Because I'm not laughing on the inside at all. And she said, call it. And on the thing, once they do once they call a stroke, the clock starts, and they have 3 hours, right? So it said, call it. And I said, okay. And she said, well, I heard this great spiritual teacher yesterday. And I'm like, I don't want to be quoted. I'm freaking out here, and I don't want to be quoted. She said, no, I heard this great spiritual teacher yesterday. And I said, okay, so what did he say? He said, well, that in any situation can be transformed. That there's this miracle called the miracle of transformation, and that you can transform any situation. I said, oh? And she said, yes, he was really good, right? And I said, okay. And she said, he taught us that the first principle was to accept it just the way it is, without resistance, without judgment. I said, he did? And she said, yes. He said that we had to accept it right where we are. And I said, okay, I can do that. She said, okay. Then he said that you actually have to acknowledge that God's right there. That God is fully present in that situation. That God is fully present in my body, in this hospital bed, in this moment, that God is fully present. And you have to acknowledge God. And then she said, then he taught that everything is energy. And that if everything is energy, then energy can be called into higher forms of experience. So then he said that no matter what's going on, you actually have to call it into a higher form of life. You call it into a greater expression. So she said, I want us to call it. It says right there, call it. So we sat down together. Well, she laid down. I sat down. And we began to call it. We began to call it in wholeness, and we began to call in healing. And we began to call in the healing power of God that was greater than any situation or connection. We began to call that she would be completely recovered, that there would be no lasting paralysis, that her mind would not be affected, that her cognitive ability would not be affected, that her life would be greater and greater than it's ever been before, and that this was experienced, no matter what it came for good and only good, and we began to call it. And then we began to give thanks. We began to give thanks for the miracle that was coming even before we could see it. We began to give thanks right there. About 12 hours later, she walked out of the hospital with no impact at all. Can I get a thank you, God? All right? And then because I didn't learn my lesson fully, we got to do it again on Thursday, right? And only this time I was much more receptive. So the medication that she's been on can do this. She's now been off the medication for a week. She will not be taking this medication again. But it's out of her system, and it's going out of her system. But it's about a 25-day period to get all the residue of this medication out of her system. So if you want a prayer project for the next 25 days, I invite you to hold my wife in your thoughts and prayers, if you would, please. All right? So thank you. So here's the deal, right? It's really good to come on Sunday morning and hear spiritual principles. We love that. We love to come and entertain spiritual ideas and think godly thoughts and be inspired and stuff. But the reason that we do this on Sunday morning is for Monday morning, right? That these spiritual principles work, but they only work if you work them. They only make a difference in your life if you actually apply them. And the moment you need to apply them, they need to be so integrated into your life that you can hang on to them even in a moment of crisis. And so in this series on miracles, even if you don't get all 8 of them, but that you fully integrate 1 or 2 or 3 of the ideas that I'm sharing with you, and that you integrate them so deeply that in your greatest moment of need, you have them, it changes everything. So if you want to hang on to the miracle of transformation, then hang on to the miracle of transformation. I'm going to talk today about the miracle of surrender, because the miracle of surrender is just as important, right? But I don't even care which spiritual ideas you hang on to, but I want to make sure that no matter what's happening in your life, you have a spiritual principle or idea that you can hang on to in such a way that it makes a difference in your great times of need. Because the reality is that we all have times of need. Jesus said, in the world, there's tribulation. But he said, be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world. He didn't say if you live the spiritual life, nothing happens to you. Right? Some of us get disappointed when we begin to live the spiritual life because we think it's supposed to clear off the slate and there's no more issues. No, you still have issues. But you have a spiritual foundation from which to live from that makes a difference, that gives you the power to look to God in those spiritual situations. So today we're going to talk about surrender. Let's shoot the slide up. How many of you have felt that if you surrender, you lost? How many of you felt like if you surrendered, it was a sign of weakness? That if you surrender, it's because you couldn't push hard enough to make what you want happen? Today I want to talk about the spirituality of surrender and how important surrender is as a part of our spiritual life so that we can practice over and over and over again letting go into a greater experience. And I want to begin with, in the Old Testament, 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. And it's the story where a woman, the woman with the oil. From verse 1. Now the wife of the member of the company of prophets cried to Elisha, your servant, my husband, is dead. You know that your servant feared the Lord, but creditors have come to take away his 2 sons and to sell them into slavery. Elijah said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in your house? And she answered, your servant has nothing in the house except for a jar of oil. Now, I want to stop it right there, because how she responds to Elijah, and Elijah, if you look at the Old Testament, is a Christ-like figure. Elijah is a fully evolved man of God, a person of God. Elijah is a Christ-like figure. And so when the Christ-like figure asked the woman, what do you have? What was her first response? I don't got it. I don't have anything. And I want you to see that from our human point of view, that's where we tend to go over and over and over again. When the Christ in us, when our spiritual nature asks us, what do we have? What do we want to say? I got nothing. Right? I got nothing. There's nothing in my house. I don't have anything. I'm just profoundly messed up. Nothing's going to work. Right? And then she said, but I do have this little bit of oil. It's not going to be enough. It's absolutely not going to be enough, but I do have this little bit of oil. And then Elijah said to her, then go shut the door behind you and your children and start pouring it into vessels until each vessel is full. So go borrow as many vessels from your neighbor as possible, empty vessels, and not too few. So she left and she went and she began to pour. When the vessels were full, she went with her sons and said, "Bring me more." And her son said, "No, they're all full." And when she then went to Elijah, to the man of God, and he said to her, "Now go sell the oil, pay your debts, and you and your children shall live on the rest." So when we look at the power of surrender, I want to talk about 5 aspects of it. And the first aspect of surrender is surrendering to the power of God in you. Now, why is that important? What did she want to have happen when she went to Elijah? Why did she go to Elijah? Why do we go to outer sources when we're having a problem? Because we want them to fix it. Right? Is that true? How many of us have wanted somebody to ride in as a stallion to save us, or over and over again we want the lottery to fix our financial problems, or whatever it is, right? Over and over again, what we tend to want to do when we're praying for a miracle is want something out there to come in and save us, because we don't believe that we have anything to save ourselves. So the first element of this miracle, and the first element of surrender, is surrendering to the power of God in you. That no miracle happens until we surrender to the power of God in you. That every miracle is actually unleashing the power of God in you. So over and over and over again, instead of looking outside of ourselves to be saved for somebody else, Elijah did what every good teacher does. He turned her back on herself, said, "Go back to your house, close the door, and give what you have. Discover the wealth that is within you," right? Over and over again, a good teacher doesn't save you from yourself. A good teacher turns you back to yourself. So the first aspect of surrender is surrendering to the power of God in you. That you are the access point for the infinite. You are the access point for all that God is. And the second point, the second aspect of surrender, is surrendering into the moment. Like that our help, that our miracle, our opportunity isn't going to come someday. That we surrender to the moment that it's already fully here. Like she kept wanting to be saved sometime, someday. And the miracle was right where she was. It was right there, right in the moment. And what I want you to see is that in God, everything that you're ever going to want or need is already present within you. It's already there. So when we surrender to the power of God in us, in that moment, we can actually access a greater level of good, okay? So the first aspect of surrender is to surrender to the God in us. The second aspect is that it's in now. It's in this present moment. And the third aspect of surrender is fun. Because one of the things that we focused on over and over again is this idea of asking, believing. True? Ask and then believe. Now, if you ask believing, what is your next step? The miracle is surrender. Help me out here. If you ask believing, what's your next step? If you ask believing, and the miracle is surrender. If you ask believing, what's your next step? Did we say surrender? Let's go with surrender. Right? Let's go with surrender, right? But what I want you to see is how often we don't do that, right? We ask believing that it's going to get done. We ask believing, and then we create a to-do list of the 20 things that we need to do to make the miracle happen. And over and over again, what we're taught is to ask believing, and then it's done. We don't believe that it's done, so that we get busy doing all the things that we think we need to do to help God create a miracle. And in reality, all we need to do is ask, believing that it's done, and then we throw it over our shoulder. Then we just let it go. We just release it and let God take care of it. So imagine you're writing down your desires. Oh, I have a desire for a great new relationship, and I believe that that's possible. So you take the desire, You throw it over your shoulder. Why? Because you surrender to God. You let it go because God's now in charge. You don't have to do 20 things to make it happen. You simply have to ask, believing that it will be done, and it will be done. And then you simply throw it over your shoulder. So you want to try? Okay, I want you to actually try. We're going to actually do this together. I want you to think of something in your life that you want to experience, a desire of your heart. It can be a spiritual desire, it can be a physical desire. I don't care what it is. I want you to think of one desire. I want you to ask, believing that it's going to happen, believing that God is going to respond to you, believing that there's a way for you to experience that. And then literally, as you ask, believing, I want you to imagine gathering it up in your hands and throwing it over your shoulder. Ready, set, go. Throw it over your shoulder. Now, could you feel that? Now, what happens if you want to take that situation back and worry about it some more? Right? So what do? You surrender it. You throw it over your shoulder again. You ask, believing, and then you surrender. You ask, believe, and then you surrender. You ask, believe, and then you surrender. Over and over and over again. And if you don't surrender, I'd like to suggest this, I don't think you're really believing. Because if you believe, then you would let God be in charge of it. You wouldn't take a list. Now, next week I'm going to talk about actions, but you don't get to go to actions till you get down surrender. Because we are hyper vigilant when it comes to action. If I told you there were 20 things you needed to do to support your spiritual life, oh my gosh, we would be so excited. We'd all be Twitter pated. Oh my gosh, great, 20 things. I'll see if I can get them done this afternoon. Right? But if I said all you have to do to move your life forward is surrender, you say, do you have another spiritual teacher here? Right? When's Richard getting back? Because this guy's just, right? Because over and over again, will you say it with me? Ask, believe, surrender. Together? Ask, believe, surrender. Ask, believe, surrender. And I want you to feel the freedom of that. That's how easy your spiritual life is supposed to be. You are a desire machine. Your job is to come up with one desire after another. Because we don't fully believe in God, we're worried that God's too old, he's getting up there in years. And, there's so many people now, and there's so many desires, that I'm just going to pick my 3 or 4 that are most important to me. And really, that's never the way it's supposed to work. You're here to be a desire machine. You have your desire. You write it down. You believe it. Right? And then you simply let it go. I'll pick it up, I promise. All of you that are worried that there's trash on the stage, I promise it will not be here when Richard gets back. I promise. Right? So here's the deal. So the first one is surrender to God and you. Second one, surrender to the moment. Third one, surrender because it's being asked, believe, surrender. The fourth one that I want you to see is about spiritual. It's about having a realization that when you pray and you actually know that it's done, when you pray and you actually can see the spiritual truth in your mind's eye, the only appropriate thing to do then is to surrender. When you pray for a healing, when you pray for abundance, when you pray for a relationship, and you can actually see it done in your mind's eye, when you have a spiritual realization, the only thing left to do then is to surrender. And number 5, and this is my last one. How many of you have heard the idea in Buddhism that all attachment leads to suffering? Right? In Buddhism, there's this very strong concept that all attachment leads to suffering, right? And why is that? Because when we want something, then that desire, that wanting, that attachment to it creates a sense of suffering, misery, uncomfortableness when you don't have it. But if we really look at attachment, what does it take to live in attachment? It takes 2 things to be in attachment. First is you, right? And the second thing is what you want, your desire, your attachment, right? Now, in unity, we talk a lot about oneness, right? But in attachment, how many things are there? 2, right? Here's the problem. There's 2, right? So there's you and then there's the thing that you want. The last level of surrender is surrendering to the understanding or the belief in separation. See, if we believe that there's us and then the thing that we want, we're now separate from the thing that we want. But if we really look at this from a spiritual point of view, there's only oneness. So whatever you desire is already a part of you. It's already spiritually yours. That in true spirituality, there is no such thing as two. That in God there's only one. So the final thing to surrender then is the belief or the experience or the idea of separateness. The belief that you're separate from that which you desire. That the final act of surrendering is surrendering even the belief that you're separate from God. That you cannot be separate from any good thing. And as you surrender your sense of separation, there is just the miracles of God. So you ready for your homework? So your homework this week is to surrender. And I'm going to invite you to look at a very specific type of surrender. I want you to surrender any place where you feel any sense of angst. Like if there's any place in your life where there's angst, I want you to surrender that. Surrender the thought, surrender the belief, surrender the fear, surrender the sense of separation, surrender whatever you need to surrender so that you can go back to the realization that whatever I ask for is already mine. That whatever I ask for, it's the Father's good pleasure to give it to me. That whatever I ask for, I already am. Will you pray with me? I invite you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to the activity of God that is right here, right now. That we are one with the one. We are one with all that God is. And so today, over and over and over again, we ask, believing that we will receive it, and then we completely surrender it to God. We ask, believing that we will receive it, and we completely surrender it to God. In the name and through the power of the living Christ, we give thanks, and so it is. Amen. God bless you all. Have a great week. Thanks for being here. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. All right, let's stand and sing our song of peace.
Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as creator, family all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. Take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth. Let it begin with me.
God bless you all and have a great miracle this week.